Patricia Patsy McQueen came from a large family. She regularly made her parents, 6 sisters, and 4 brothers laugh with her witty jokes or clever pranks. She loved sports, baseball in particular, and music. Her family remembers her constantly dancing and singing at home, even at just 14 years old. She was very strong and independent, with dreams of traveling the world once she was older. Patsy was popular and had many friends. One of those friends was Eva Dvorak, who was in grade 9 with Patsy at Ian Bazalgette Junior High School in Calgary, Alberta. Eva was bright and bubbly, and shared Patsy's love of music. She never sat still, singing and dancing at all times of day. She loved roller skating, swimming, and ice skating, especially with her sisters and cousins. The two 14-year-olds were last seen alive on Valentine's Day of 1976, walking in downtown Calgary. At approximately 10:45 the following morning, February 15th, a man driving to Cochrane, Alberta, spotted the bodies of the 2 girls lying face down in the snow under the Happy Valley overpass on Highway 1, west of Calgary. The scene was surprisingly calm, given the circumstances. There were no signs of a struggle, the girls' clothes were undisturbed, and there was no obvious physical damage done to them. Tire tracks in the snow were the only obvious clue at the scene. Semen was found on Patsy and Eva's bodies during their autopsies. Alberta's chief medical examiner found that they had both died of asphyxia, but argued that they had died in some sort of drug-related incident rather than at someone else's hand. A coroner's jury was held but reached no conclusion over the nature of the girls' deaths, so they were ruled sudden deaths rather than as homicides. More than 45 years after the girls were killed, their deaths were linked to 2 other homicides. DNA testing had not been available to investigators in 1976, but the semen found on the girls was preserved. In 2022, the evidence from their case was resubmitted to the lab and a DNA profile from the semen was developed. When it was run through police databases, investigators learned that the same DNA profile had been found on the bodies of 2 other young women who had been killed in Calgary, one in 1976 and the other in 1977, just over a year after Eva and Patsy were killed. Melissa Rohorek was a native of Windsor, Ontario, but her love of adventure took her to Western Canada. In 1976, 20-year-old Melissa was living in the YWCA in Calgary and working as a housekeeper at the International Hotel, although she was hoping to soon get a job in childcare. Whenever she had a break from work, she loved to explore. She had come to Alberta because of her love of the outdoors and her desire to see all of the natural beauty Canada had to offer. Banff National Park, west of Calgary, was one of her favorite places to visit. On September 15, 1976, one of Melissa's roommates at the YWCA saw her leaving with some of her toiletries packed up in a red shopping bag. She had a few days off from work and planned to hitchhike out of the city. Melissa never made it to the mountains as planned. The following morning, her body was found in a ditch alongside a gravel road, approximately 13 miles west of Calgary, by motorists as they drove by. There were obvious signs of a struggle at the scene, displaced gravel on the road, a man's shoe print in nearby dirt, and a clump of long dark hair clutched in Melissa's hand. The medical examiner determined that Melissa had been punched in the head, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death. Nothing was stolen from her, and her wallet with cash inside was found with her body. According to her brother Jim, 19-year-old Barbara McLean was full of life and smart as hell. In early 1977, she was enjoying her first real taste of life outside of her hometown. Barbara was from the rural community of Inverness, Nova Scotia, a small, former mining community that had few options available to her once she finished high school. Barbara was very independent and wanted the chance to stand on her own 2 feet without the help of her parents. However, family was very important to her, so when she did leave Inverness, she moved in with her 2 brothers in Calgary and got a job at a bank there. She did miss her parents and eventually began feeling homesick, so she planned a 2-week trip back home for the beginning of March 1977. She also reportedly had plans to move back home later in the year so that she could start university. Barbara was at the Highlander Hotel Tavern to see a cabaret with her boyfriend and her brother Bobby on the evening of February 25, 1977. They had plans to go to a party together later that night, but Barbara and her boyfriend got into a fight, so she left the tavern to walk to the party alone around 2 a.m. on the 26th. Barbara's body was discovered approximately 6 hours later by a man walking his dog just outside of Calgary city limits near the airport. When she was found, she was fully clothed, although her jacket was on inside out. There were bruises on her arm and neck, and the fingers on her left hand were bloody. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. There is absolutely no reason for this to happen. She didn't have any enemies. Her brother Bobby told the Calgary Albertan at the time, "I just can't seem to put the pieces of the puzzle together." He did note that his sister was a very trusting person, perhaps too trusting. Calgary was the site of numerous unsolved murders of young women in the late 1970s, so it was difficult to determine which, if any, of the murders had been committed by the same perpetrator. Melissa and Barbara's murders were definitively shown to have been committed by the same person in 2003. Semen had been found on both of their bodies, and DNA analysis showed that it was from the same man. There were no matches to the profile in Canada's National DNA Data Bank at the time. The profile was uploaded to the databank, but no matches were found for another 20 years. In 2021, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Calgary Police Service began formally working together on Melissa and Barbara's case in hopes that they could use genetic genealogy to identify the man who had killed them. Coincidentally, evidence from Patsy and Eva's case was resubmitted to the lab for forensic examination in 2022. A DNA profile was developed from the semen found on both of their bodies and entered into the National DNA Databank. A match was found. The same DNA profile was found in the semen, found on the bodies of Eva, Patsy, Melissa, and Barbara. Investigators now knew that they were looking for a serial killer. By the time all 4 cases were linked, the RCMP lab had made some progress in identifying the killer. They had initially been investigating for just Melissa and Barbara's murders. They had been working with Parabad Nanolabs and Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy, which had eventually led them to a potential suspect. Their investigation took them to multiple provinces in Canada and states across the border in the USA before they could confirm that he was the man they had been looking for. On May 17, 2024, the RCMP announced that DNA evidence had identified the killer of Eva Dvorak, Patsy McQueen, Melissa Rohorek, and Barbara McLean as Gary Allen Sreeri. Sreeri was born in 1942 in Oak Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He grew up as the oldest of 3 children. Sometime in the mid-1950s, his family moved to California. There, he went on to graduate high school and get married in 1960. He and his wife had a son, but got divorced in 1969. Criminal history began during his marriage. In 1965, he was found guilty of rape by force, oral copulation, sodomy, and kidnapping in Los Angeles. If he served any time for these convictions, it was very short, as he faced burglary charges less than a year after his conviction. These charges were ultimately dismissed. In 1966, he was again charged with sexually based offenses. He was charged with kidnapping and assault to commit rape, as well as sex perversion, which led to him being classified as a mentally disordered sex offender by the state of California and sentenced to mental health custody. He was charged with rape again in 1969, but was acquitted. Soon, he was facing drug charges, which led to him serving time in San Quentin. He was paroled to Sonoma, California in 1972, but was in Florence, Oregon by the following year, when he was charged with, but not convicted of, kidnapping and sodomy. He was sent back to Los Angeles to serve time for violating his parole. In 1974, while still in Los Angeles, Sreeri was once again charged with rape. He posted bail and was released while the charges were pending. He never came to court for his scheduled appearances. It now appears that a short time after Sreeri was released, he illegally crossed the border into Canada. Sreeri then did not have any significant contact with police until 1996, when he was imprisoned for sexual assault and forcible confinement after committing a violent rape in New Westminster, British Columbia. However, authorities believed that their prisoner's name was Rex Long, one of Sreeri's numerous aliases. He had been able to get a driver's license using that name and receive social assistance. A tip from authorities in the U.S. led to his true identity being uncovered. Sriri was deported to the United States in 2003 after completing his sentence. In 2008, Sriri committed the crime that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. The victim of this crime has never been publicly identified to protect her privacy. For the sake of clarity in telling her story, and to avoid having to refer to her only as the woman or the victim, I have given her the alias of Jane in this video. Again, I would like to reiterate that while I will be referring to her as Jane, this is not her actual name. Sriri met 44-year-old Jane at the Mousetrap Bar in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho on June 18, 2008. She was using crutches at the time, so he offered to give her a ride home. When they arrived at Jane's home, he attacked her. He spent the next several hours physically and sexually assaulting Jane. During the long ordeal, he raped, beat, and strangled Jane. The attack did not end until Jane's boyfriend arrived home at 5 a.m., at which point Sriri fled the house but was soon apprehended by police. The attack on Jane was so brutal and violent that it caused her to have a stroke, which resulted in irreversible damage to the left side of her body. Despite the horrific assault she endured, Jane nevertheless displayed incredible bravery and character when she appeared in court for Sriri's sentencing following his conviction for her rape. She now walked with a cane and had difficulty speaking, both results of the stroke Sriri had caused. On the stand, she repeated Sriri's name to get his attention until he was forced to look at her before she began her statement. From the stand, she told him, "I have grandchildren, I have children, I have a family that loves me very much, that has had to watch me go through living hell, and it is not fair. You damaged me and I can't be repaired. There has got to be a lifetime sentence for you, just as I'm having to pay a lifetime sentence for no wrongdoing." Jane expressed gratitude to God that she had been the one Sriri attacked that night, and that it had not been a younger woman or a teenager. She said that she had forgiven Sriri, but asked the judge to impose a life sentence for the sake of protecting other women from him. The judge did so. In an interview conducted after the sentence was announced, Jane said that her first thought when she heard the sentence was, "Thank God. I felt like I had done my job. I was going to see him convicted to save other women." Sriri's life sentence ultimately was not very long, as he died of natural causes at the Idaho State Correctional Center on April 27, 2011, at the age of 68. Unfortunate timing had caused a delay in Sriri being identified as the perpetrator of the murders in Canada. Sriri's DNA was not uploaded to Idaho State DNA Databank until 2013. The RCMP had run their international DNA search in 2012. He was therefore not identified for over another decade when genetic genealogy identified him as a potential suspect, and the RCMP was able to request his DNA profile from authorities in Idaho. While the murders of Patsy, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara have been solved, it is disappointing to many of the individuals who worked so diligently on the case that Sriri is not alive to face justice for these crimes. It pains us that he's dead, Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie, head of the Alberta RCMP Historical Homicide Unit, said at a press conference, "I'd love nothing more than to tell you we just put handcuffs on this guy, but unfortunately, that's not the way this one ends. The investigation into Patsy, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara's case is now closed, but the investigation into Sriri is far from over. Authorities are very concerned by the fact that Sriri's criminal history shows very short periods of time between most of his known crimes before he came to Canada, but there are decades between the crimes that they currently know about once he crossed the border. The RCMP is currently investigating the possibility that he is responsible for more crimes, either unsolved or unreported, committed between 1974, when he illegally entered Canada, and 1996, when he was arrested in British Columbia. Knowing where Sriri was living throughout this period is critical to investigating this possibility. The RCMP is working to put together a timeline of Sriri's movements within Canada. They have so far been able to confirm that he was in Alberta from 1976 until 1979, when he appears to have moved to British Columbia and remained there until his 1996 arrest. In British Columbia, he lived in numerous communities, including Vancouver, Surrey, Half Moon Bay, Abbotsford, and Chilliwack. Sriri's transient lifestyle is just one of the complicating factors in determining where he was throughout this period. He also generally worked off the books, often as a cook. While he seems to have always kept his hair dark, He regularly changed other details about his appearance, and he drove many different vehicles. He lived under multiple assumed names, including Willie Blackman, Travis Blackwell, and Rex Long. He is known to have been in several relationships, and some of his acquaintances have been identified, which does help with the investigation. When Sriri's identification as Patsy, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara's murderer was announced, the RCMP also issued an appeal for anyone who knew Sriri during this period to come forward to help develop this timeline. Within the first month, more than 50 tips were called into them. The RCMP is optimistic that they may be able to solve more crimes in both Canada and the United States by proving Sriri's responsibility for them. All of Eva, Patsy, Melissa, and Barbara's parents passed away before Sriri was identified as their killer. The surviving members of all 4 women's families released statements following the announcement of his identification, memorializing their lost loved one, detailing the profound impact their loss had on the lives of their family members, and thanking law enforcement for their efforts over the past nearly 50 years. In their statement, Patsy's siblings expressed their sympathy to the other families and relief that Sriri can no longer hurt anyone else, writing, "Monster has caused so much pain and suffering for countless families. He took a piece of every one of us when he took our loved ones. We thank God that he is no longer alive and can never harm anyone else again." Patricia P.Y. McQueen came from a large family. She regularly made her parents, 6 sisters, and 4 brothers laugh with her witty jokes or clever pranks. She loved sports, baseball in particular, and music. Her family remembers her constantly dancing and singing at home. Even at just 14 years old, she was very strong and independent, with dreams of traveling the world once she was older. PY was popular and had many friends. One of those friends was Eva Dvorak, who was in grade 9 with Patty at Ian Basiljet Junior High School in Calgary, Alberta. Eva was bright and bubbly and shared PY's love of music. She never sat still, singing and dancing at all times of day. She loved roller skating, swimming, and ice skating, especially with her sisters and cousins. The 2 14-year-olds were last seen alive on Valentine's Day of 1976, walking in downtown Calgary at approximately 10:45. The following morning, February 15th, a man driving to Cochrane, Alberta, spotted the bodies of the 2 girls lying face down in the snow under the Happy Valley overpass on Highway 1 west of Calgary. The scene was surprisingly calm given the circumstances. There were no signs of a struggle, the girls' clothes were undisturbed, and there was no obvious physical damage done to them. Tire tracks in the snow were the only obvious clue at the scene. Semen was found on PY and Eva's bodies. During their autopsies, Alberta's chief medical examiner found that they had both died of asphyxia, but argued that they had died in some sort of drug-related incident rather than at someone else's hand. A coroner's jury was held but reached no conclusion over the nature of the girls' deaths, so they were ruled sudden deaths rather than as homicides. More than 45 years after the girls were killed, their deaths were linked to 2 other homicides. DNA testing had not been available to investigators in 1976, but the semen found on the girls was preserved. In 2022, the evidence from their case was resubmitted to the lab, and a DNA profile from the semen was developed. When it was run through police databases, investigators learned that the same DNA profile had been found on the bodies of 2 other young women who had been killed in Calgary, one in 1976 and the other in 1977, just over a year after Eva and PY were killed. Melissa Rorick was a native of Windsor, Ontario, but her love of adventure took her to Western Canada. In 1976, 20-year-old Melissa was living in the YWCA in Calgary and working as a housekeeper at the International Hotel, although she was hoping to soon get a job in childcare. Whenever she had a break from work, she loved to explore. She had come to Alberta because of her love of the outdoors and her desire to see all of the natural beauty Canada had to offer. Banff National Park, west of Calgary, was one of her favorite places to visit. On September 15, 1976, one of Melissa's roommates at the YWCA saw her leaving with some of her toiletries packed up in a red shopping bag. She had a few days off from work and planned to hitchhike out of the city. Melissa never made it to the mountains as planned. The following morning, her body was found in a ditch alongside a gravel road approximately 13 miles west of Calgary by motorists as they drove by. There were obvious signs of a struggle at the scene: displaced gravel on the road, a man's shoe print in nearby dirt, and a clump of long dark hair clutched in Melissa's hand. The medical examiner determined that Melissa had been punched in the head, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death. Nothing was stolen from her, and her wallet with cash inside was found with her body. According to her brother Jim, 19-year-old Barbara McLean was full of life and smart as hell. In early 1977, she was enjoying her first real taste of life outside of her hometown. Barbara was from the rural community of Innes, Nova Scotia, a small former mining community that had few options available to her. When she finished high school, Barbara was very independent and wanted the chance to stand on her own 2 feet without the help of her parents. However, family was very important to her, so when she did leave Innes, she moved in with her 2 brothers in Calgary and got a job at a bank there. She did miss her parents and eventually began feeling homesick, so she planned a 2-week trip back home for the beginning of March 1977. She also reportedly had plans to move back home later in the year so that she could start university. Barbara was at the Highlander Hotel Tavern to see a cabaret with her boyfriend and her brother Bobby on the evening of February 25, 1977. They had plans to go to a party together later that night, but Barbara and her boyfriend got into a fight, so she left the tavern to walk to the party alone. Around 2 a.m. on the 26th, Barbara's body was discovered approximately 6 hours later by a man walking his dog just outside of Calgary city limits, near the airport. When she was found, she was fully clothed, although her jacket was on inside out. There were bruises on her arm and neck, and the fingers on her left hand were bloody. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. There is absolutely no reason for this to happen. She didn't have any enemies. Her brother Bobby told the Calgary Alberta at the time, "I just can't seem to put the pieces of the puzzle together there." He did note that his sister was a very trusting person, perhaps too trusting. Calgary was the site of numerous unsolved murders of young women in the late 1970s, so it was difficult to determine which, if any, of the murders had been committed by the same perpetrator. Melissa and Barbara's murders were definitively shown to have been committed by the same person in 2003. Semen had been found on both of their bodies, and DNA analysis showed that it was from the same man. There were no matches to the profile in Canada's National DNA Databank at the time the profile was uploaded. No matches were found for another 20 years. In 2021, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Calgary Police Service began formally working together on Melissa and Barbara's case in hopes that they could use genetic genealogy to identify the man who had killed them. Coincidentally, evidence from PY and Eva's case was resubmitted to the lab for forensic examination in 2022. A DNA profile was developed from the semen found on both of their bodies and entered into the National DNA Databank. A match was found. The same DNA profile was found in the semen found on the bodies of Eva, PY, Melissa, and Barbara. Investigators now knew that they were looking for a serial killer. By the time all 4 cases were linked, the RCMP lab had made some progress in identifying the killer. They had initially been investigating just Melissa and Barbara's murders. They had been working with Parabon Nanolabs and Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy, which had eventually led them to a potential suspect. Their investigation took them to multiple provinces in Canada and states across the border in the USA before they could confirm that he was the man they had been looking for. On May 17, 2024, the RCMP announced that DNA evidence had identified the killer of Eva Dvorak, Patty McQueen, Melissa Rorick, and Barbara McLean as Gary Allen S. He was born in 1942 in Oak Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He grew up as the oldest of 3 children. Sometime in the mid-1950s, his family moved to California. There, he went on to graduate high school and get married in 1960. He and his wife had a son but got divorced in 1969. S's known criminal history began during his marriage. In 1965, he was found guilty of rape by force, oral copulation, sodomy, and kidnapping in Los Angeles. If he served any time for these convictions, it was very short, as he faced burglary charges less than a year after his conviction. These charges were ultimately dismissed. In 1966, he was again charged with sexually based offenses. He was charged with kidnapping and assault to commit rape, as well as sex perversion, which led to him being classified as a mentally disordered sex offender by the state of California and sentenced to mental health custody. He was charged with rape again in 1969 but was acquitted. Soon he was facing drug charges, which led to him serving time in San Quentin. He was paroled to Sonoma, California in 1972, but was in Florence, Oregon by the following year when he was charged with, but not convicted of, kidnapping and sodomy. He was sent back to Los Angeles to serve time for violating his parole in 1974. While still in Los Angeles, Sari was once again charged with rape. He posted bail and was released while the charges were pending. He never came to court for his scheduled appearances. It now appears that a short time after S was released, he illegally crossed the border into Canada. Sari then did not have any significant contact with police until 1996, when he was imprisoned for sexual assault and forcible confinement after committing a violent rape in New Westminster, British Columbia. However, authorities believed that their prisoner's name was Rex Long, one of S's numerous aliases. He had been able to get a driver's license using that name and receive social assistance. A tip from authorities in the U.S. led to his true identity being uncovered. Sari was deported to the United States in 2003 after completing his sentence. In 2008, Sari committed the crime that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. The victim of this crime has never been publicly identified to protect her privacy. For the sake of clarity in telling her story and to avoid having to refer to her only as the woman or the victim, I have given her the alias of Jane in this video. Again, I would like to reiterate that while I will be referring to her as Jane, this is not her actual name. Sway met 44-year-old Jane at the Mousetrap Bar in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, on June 18, 2008. She was using crutches at the time, so he offered to give her a ride home. When they arrived at Jane's home, he attacked her. He spent the next several hours physically and sexually assaulting Jane. During the long ordeal, he raped, beat, and strangled Jane. The attack did not end until Jane's boyfriend arrived home at 5 a.m., at which point Sway fled the house but was soon apprehended by police. The attack on Jane was so brutal and violent that it caused her to have a stroke, which resulted in irreversible damage to the left side of her body. Despite the horrific assault she endured, Jane nevertheless displayed incredible bravery and character when she appeared in court for S's sentencing. Following his conviction for her rape, she now walked with a cane and had difficulty speaking, both results of the stroke Sway had caused. On the stand, she repeated S's name to get his attention until he was forced to look at her. Before she began her statement from the stand, she told him, "I have grandchildren. I have children. I have a family that loves me very much, that has had to watch me go through living hell, and it is not fair. You damaged me and I can't be repaired. This has to be a lifetime sentence for you, just as I'm having to pay a lifetime sentence for no wrongdoing." Jane expressed gratitude to God that she had been the one S attacked that night and that it had not been a younger woman or a teenager. She said that she had forgiven Sway but asked the judge to impose a life sentence for the sake of protecting other women from him. The judge did so in an interview conducted after the sentence was announced. Jane said that her first thought when she heard the sentence was, "Thank God, I felt like I had done my job. I was going to see him convicted to save other women." S's life sentence ultimately was not very long, as he died of natural causes at the Idaho State Correctional Center on April 27, 2011, at the age of 68. Unfortunate timing had caused a delay in Sway being identified as the perpetrator of the murders in Canada. S's DNA was not uploaded to Idaho State DNA Databank until 2013. The RCMP had run their international DNA search in 2012. He was therefore not identified for over another decade, when genetic genealogy identified him as a potential suspect, and the RCMP was able to request his DNA profile from authorities in Idaho. While the murders of PY, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara have been solved, it is disappointing to many of the individuals who worked so diligently on the case that Sway is not alive to face justice for these crimes. It pains us that he's dead, Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie, head of the Alberta RCMP Historical Homicide Unit, said at a press conference, "I'd love nothing more than to tell you we just put handcuffs on this guy, but unfortunately, that's not the way this one ends. The investigation into PY, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara's case is now closed, but the investigation is far from over. Authorities are very concerned by the fact that S's criminal history shows very short periods of time between most of his known crimes before he came to Canada, but there are decades between the crimes that they currently know about. Once he crossed the border, the RCMP is currently investigating the possibility that he is responsible for more crimes, either unsolved or unreported, committed between 1974, when he illegally entered Canada, and 1996, when he was arrested in British Columbia. Knowing where S was living throughout this period is critical to investigating this possibility. The RCMP is working to put together a timeline of S's movements within Canada. They have so far been able to confirm that he was in Alberta from 1976 until 1979, when he appears to have moved to British Columbia and remained there until his 1996 arrest. In British Columbia, he lived in numerous communities including Vancouver, Half Moon Bay, Abbotsford, and Chilliwack. S's transient lifestyle is just one of the complicating factors in determining where he was throughout this period. He also generally worked off the books, often as a cook. While he seems to have always kept his hair dark, he regularly changed other details about his appearance, and he drove many different vehicles. He lived under multiple assumed names, including Willie Blackman, Travis Blackwell, and Rex Long. He is known to have been in several relationships, and some of his acquaintances have been identified, which does help with the investigation. When S's identification as PY, Eva, Melissa, and Barbara's murderer was announced, the RCMP also issued an appeal for anyone who knew Sari during this period to come forward to help develop this timeline. Within the first month, more than 50 tips were called into them. The RCMP is optimistic that they may be able to solve more crimes in both Canada and the United States by proving S's responsibility for them all. All four of Eva, PY, Melissa, and Barbara's parents passed away before Sher was identified as their killer. The surviving members of all four women's families released statements following the announcement of his identification, memorializing their lost loved ones, detailing the profound impact their loss had on the lives of their family members, and thanking law enforcement for their efforts over the past nearly 50 years. In their statement, PY's siblings expressed their sympathy to the other families and relief that Sway can no longer hurt anyone else. This evil monster has caused so much pain and suffering for countless families. He took a piece of every one of us when he took our loved ones. We thank God that he is no longer alive and can never harm anyone else again. 16-year-old Billy Carroll was well known in his Chicago neighborhood, mainly because he was friendly and funny. However, Billy also had his secrets. He spent little time at home and little time at school. He spent most of his days on the streets, but even his friends were in the dark as to what he did with most of his time. Despite coming from an impoverished family, he always seemed to have money, which was unusual in the uptown neighborhood. When he had cash, he loved to spend it on food, and he had nicer things like skates that most kids in the neighborhood did not have access to. When he came into extra cash, he would also use it to buy food and clothes for his friends. Billy was clever and driven to make money, which sometimes led to him acquiring it by less than legal means. Billy was a middle child of 3. His parents struggled to support them, especially Billy's younger sister, Caroline, who had been born with severe disabilities. Eventually, the family had to make the difficult decision to place her in a residential facility. Caroline lived there until 2012 when she passed away. Both of Billy's parents drank and were abusive, and Billy would eventually come to blows with his father on numerous occasions, sometimes out of self-defense and sometimes defending his mother. After watching the 1972 Olympics on television, Billy became focused on working out. He joined the local YMCA so he could swim, box, and lift weights. Samuel Stapleton was born in Chicago but grew up in a humble home with no running water in the woods near the Ohio-Kentucky border. While his family did not have much money, Sam thrived as he ran wild through the woods, getting dirty and scraped up as he climbed trees and jumped into creeks. Sam's family eventually moved to Chicago for more economic opportunities, living in multiple neighborhoods over time. When his family moved to the Chicago neighborhood of Uptown, he made a point of identifying and then easily beating up the toughest kid in the neighborhood before his family's belongings were even brought into their apartment, so as to immediately secure a tough reputation with the other kids. He knew how to defend himself physically and how to respond when someone was taking advantage of him, something he appears to have inherited from his mother, Bessie. He was streetwise and knew how to navigate around the various gangs that operated in his neighborhood. In May of 1976, Sam was preparing to enter high school. He looked forward to joining ROC at Sen High School. He had his first job as a delivery boy for a local pizza shop and hoped to soon have even better employment. A contractor calling himself John would call the Stapleton home asking for Sam with the promise of a job with his company. The boy Sam beat up upon his arrival to Uptown was Randy Rivette, who did not harbor a grudge over the fight. The two boys were not close friends, but managed to coexist as two of the toughest kids in their neighborhood. Randy was one of 4 children, and his family originally hailed from Kentucky. His father was abusive towards his mother, and the children sometimes tried to protect her from him. They all, including Randy, would sometimes run away for brief periods when their home life became too difficult to deal with, but they always came home after a short time. He was just 15 years old when he disappeared on May 14, 1976. Dale Landigan moved around extensively as a child, which was reflected in his name. His name was really Frank, but his father nicknamed him Del because he had been born in Delaware, which eventually evolved into Dale. He and his 4 sisters all adored their mother. After years of living in Brooklyn, the family moved to Chicago's Uptown neighborhood in 1969 to escape growing crime in New York and join Dale's great-uncle Pablo, who owned an apartment building where he offered Dale's family a unit. Dale liked to play pranks, although he could sometimes take them too far, once convincing his family that he had been hit by a car and killed at a gas station. He could come off as aggressive and pushy, but could ultimately win over friends. In February of 1978, 19-year-old Billy Kindred was in love with his girlfriend Mary Jo. The young couple planned to marry once Billy found a good job. One night, however, Billy failed to show up for their nightly meeting, and all his belongings were found left in his bedroom. Mary Jo reported him missing and spent months driving around Chicago looking for him after she got off of work. When Mary Jo first met Billy, she took note of how physically attractive she found him. But she had truly been drawn in by his kind smile. He respected her and he respected his elders, which won him the approval of Mary Jo's mother and grandmother. Gregory Godzek was a hockey player, but he did not have the aggressive personality associated with the sport. Sometimes people would try to fight him, but he had little patience for such things. He was instead kind-hearted with a carefree nature. He lived with his parents and sister and was the grandson of Polish immigrants. He had left a job with a lumber company because he had been paid so well by John Wayne Gacy for contracting work. John Sitch was a middle child of 5. He loved animals from a young age and kept pets ranging from bullfrogs to albino hamsters. He regularly brought home stray dogs and cats from the neighborhood to care for as well. As a child, he was an altar server at Chicago's oldest Polish church and attended the parish school. His family moved to the suburb of Des Plaines just before he began his junior year of high school, and he quickly made friends with the members of the school's drama department, hanging out with them in the woods after school. He also got a job at a local pet store. One of his high school friends described him as a sweetheart and claimed to have never seen John without a smile. He remained close with his friends in Chicago even after he moved and returned there for parties and nights out. Although he was not a big drinker. 20-year-old David Talma volunteered for the Marines in 1977. He was on inactive duty when he had plans to attend a concert in Hammond, Indiana on the evening of December 9, 1977. He had made arrangements to meet up with a young woman there around 2 a.m., but he never showed up. He instead vanished. 15-year-old Rob Pist kept a busy schedule. He was an honor student at Maine West High School. He was 2 merit badges and a community service project shy of reaching his goal of becoming an Eagle Scout. Extracurricular activities like working tech on his school play or gymnastics kept him at school until 5:30 p.m. And on most days, his mother would pick him up from school with a hot meal that he would eat on his way to work his 6 to 9 p.m. shift at Neeson's Pharmacy. His co-workers there would later describe him as a wholesome kid who they could not envision ever smoking or using swear words. He was kind and polite, sometimes loaning his coat to the girl working the front register, who was subjected to cold air when the door to the store was opened. He was supposed to go home after his shift on December 11, 1978 to eat cake to celebrate his mother's 46th birthday, but he instead left with John Wayne Gacy to discuss a summer job with his construction company. Rob had just been denied a raise at the pharmacy, and Gacy's rate of $5 an hour was nearly double what he was making there. He was saving up to buy a Jeep with $900 already put aside for the eventual purchase once he could drive. John Prestige grew up in Michigan, mainly in the Kalamazoo area. His father lived in a trailer there, and his mother and stepfather owned a beehive farm in a nearby town. He began taking healthcare classes part-time at Kalamazoo Valley Community College after graduating high school, paying for them by working at a local motel. He did not get along with management there, and traveled whenever he could to get away from the stresses of his everyday life. He had gone to New Orleans for Martyra in February of 1977, and the following month, he was in Chicago visiting a friend as he made his way out to Colorado to go skiing. 17-year-old Michael Bonin lived near Wrigley Field with his father, stepmother, and younger sister before going missing on June 3, 1976. His fishing license was later found inside Gay's home. He was athletic, a talented wrestler and baseball player at the time of his disappearance. He had been working at a gas station. Russell Nelson was an architecture student at the University of Minnesota who came to Chicago in the fall of 1977 towards the beginning of a long road trip that would take him as far north as Toronto and as far south as Florida. He was a talented dancer who had won competitions back in Minnesota. He was last heard from on October 17, 1977, when he called his mother to wish her a happy birthday. According to his mother, he and a friend had been doing work for a contractor while in Chicago. Russell also left behind a fiancé. The son of a police sergeant. 18-year-old Robert Gilroy received one of the most extensive investigations into his disappearance when he first went missing. His father conducted his own investigation, and his file with the Chicago police consists of more than 40 pages. Robert disappeared on September 15, 1977, after telling his parents he was going to his horseback riding lesson in Northbrook, although he had in fact stopped attending the lessons weeks earlier. He was not reported missing until nearly 2 weeks later because he was supposed to be at a camp in Gaithersburg, Maryland. He never made it to the camp. Rick Johnston lived in the suburb of Bensonville, but was last seen in Chicago when his mother dropped him off in front of the Aragon Ballroom in the Uptown neighborhood. Multiple bands were playing the venue that night, but Rick told his mother he would call her for a ride home after the band Spirit played their set. He never made that call. His family feared he had been recruited by a cult because of his recent interest in religion and studying the Bible. They traveled as far as Washington, D.C. to look for Rick amongst the congregants of Reverend Moon's Unification Church at one of their rallies. 19-year-old Darrell Sampson was a native of West Virginia who was living in Chicago's Uptown neighborhood when he went missing in April of 1976. He had previously run away as a juvenile in 1973 in an effort to get out of a court appearance related to curfew violations. Within a few days, he was at his father's house in Virginia. After he disappeared in 1976, he would not be seen again until his remains were found under Gacy's dining room floor at the end of 1978. The family of Matthew Bowman of Crystal Lake, Illinois, had already lost one of its members to homicide. Matthew's stepfather, Anthony Roatuso, was shot and killed during a carjacking in 1975. Matthew's mother last saw him on July 5, 1977, when she dropped him off at a rail station so he could get to a court appearance over a parking ticket. He called her a few hours later to let her know he would be going to Chicago to visit his sister at her apartment. He left his sister's apartment around 6 or 7 o'clock that night after telling her he was going home. He never arrived. John Maui had also been impacted by homicide before he himself was murdered in November of 1972 when he was just 14 years old. He had been sent to his sister Judy's apartment to check on her, only to find her stabbed to death on the floor. John joined the Marines after graduating high school, returning to Chicago after completing his service. He worked at a bank and began taking accounting classes at Truman College in Uptown. The last time his mother saw him was at her home, where he came for dinner in an effort to cheer himself up after one of his dogs was struck and killed by a car. 20-year-old Tommy Bowling was the married father of a 3-year-old boy named Timmy before disappearing on November 18, 1977. He called his parents home to check in on his father, who had not been feeling well. Around this time, he had been receiving threatening phone calls, which he took seriously enough to instruct his mother to contact the police should she not hear from him for 24 hours. 16-year-old Robert Winch was one of 6 children from Michigan. His father taught physics at Kalamazoo College. Robert had difficulties at home, which led to him staying in a foster home during weekdays. He ran away from that foster home in November of 1977. Timothy Orr was 20 years old when he vanished on June 30th, 1978. He had a distinctive tattoo that read Tim Lee on his left arm, a tribute to his love for martial artist Bruce Lee. He frequented gay bars and was close friends with a transgender woman, which Gacy's defense team later tried to use to undermine the witnesses who spoke on his behalf at Gacy's trial. 20-year-old James Mazzara of Elwood Park was last seen by his family the day after Thanksgiving of 1978. He had the nickname of Mojo. 16-year-old Kenneth Parker's family lived in the Edgewater neighborhood after moving to Chicago from Tennessee. He was going through a difficult time and was on parole. He spent a lot of time hanging out at the Yankee Doodle Dandy, a restaurant in Midtown, with his longtime friend, Michael Marino. Michael Marino was just 14 years old. He and Kenneth Parker were last seen alive on October 24, 1976 at the Yankee Doodle Dandy. The remains were later found in a shared grave beneath Gacy's house. His mother had reported him missing after he failed to arrive to see a movie with her as planned on the evening of October 24th. John Bukovich was later described as a nice kid who lived with his family on the north side of Chicago. He was close with his parents and sisters and had plenty of friends. He would always call home if he would be returning late. He had dropped out of high school to work in construction and worked for Gay on and off for over a year. When he disappeared in July of 1975, he reportedly was trying to get Gay to pay him back wages he still owed him. John's family always suspected that Gay was involved in his disappearance and called police every week for more than 2 years, trying to get them to investigate his case seriously. Authorities insisted that John had simply run away. Circumstances did not support this theory. John had been working to renovate his first apartment and had just spent $2,000 on carpeting before he disappeared. He also left behind a large amount of money in his bank account. Also discrediting the runaway theory was the fact that his car was left behind in a location Gay would later admit to moving it to. The keys were left in the ignition and John's wallet, keys, and ID were on the front seat. These 24 of Gay's victims were identified by March of 1980 and June of 1981. The 9 victims who had still not been identified were laid to rest in donated caskets. A short service for all 9 victims was held outside Abbey Chapel of the Oakage Glen Oak Cemetery, and each victim also received his own graveside service when he was buried under a grave marker reading "We Remembered." Each victim was buried in a different cemetery. In May of 1986, one of these victims was identified as 16-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy, leaving authorities with 8 individuals to identify. Tim had small-town origins, but an extensive travel history, living in and visiting numerous states across the country during his short life. This was the result of both his father's restlessness, which brought the family to places like California and Florida, and his own. He was mischievous and daring from a young age, and was never afraid to throw himself into a lake or even a moving boxcar without hesitation. At 15, he left school and obtained a fake ID so that he could work as a forklift operator. Tim's life was largely formed by his large extended family. It made up a large part of the population of his hometown of Bartlett, Iowa, and he traveled regularly to spend time with the members of the family who had moved throughout the Midwest. He spent New Year's of 1972 visiting one of his cousins in Michigan. He left Michigan by bus to return to Omaha, where his father was living on January 2nd. He had an overnight stop in Chicago during which he met Gay at the Greyhound station. In October of 2011, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart announced a renewed effort to identify the remaining 8 victims. They were all exhumed so that samples could be taken for DNA testing. And Sheriff Dart made an appeal to the public, asking for friends and relatives of young men or teenage boys who went missing any time between 1970 and December 22, 1978 to contact his office. The appeal quickly yielded results. The boy, previously only identified as Gay victim number 19, was identified as 19-year-old William George Bundy on November 29. 2011. Bill's mother had feared he had been one of Gay's victims and tried to get his dental records to submit to police as they had requested back in 1979. However, his dentist had retired, and by the time she was able to track him down, he had destroyed all of his records. Bill was identified after his brother and sister provided DNA samples. Bill had been popular at Sun High School and had plenty of friends. According to his sister, Laura, all of her friends wanted to date him and only came to see her at her house for the opportunity to see her brother. He was a talented diver and gymnast. However, Bill ultimately chose to drop out of high school to begin doing electrical work. Bill went missing in October of 1976. One evening, he told his family he was headed out to a party as he was leaving the house. He forgot to take his wallet with him. He never came home. In July of 2017, victim number 24 was identified as 16-year-old Jimmy Hackinson. His mother had gone to Chicago from her home in Minnesota in 1979 to try to learn if her son was amongst Gay's victims, but she did not have dental records to submit to the police to identify him. He was also identified thanks to DNA submitted by his brother and sister. Jimmy was one of 4 children and lived in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was funny and good-natured despite difficult circumstances at home. His father drank heavily and was largely absent, and his mother often had to work as many as 3 jobs at a time to support the family. One day in the summer of 1976, he announced to his family that he was going to Chicago. Hitchhiking was not unusual at the time, and Jimmy had left home in the past to get away from stressors at home. He had always safely returned, so this trip did not raise any concerns. He called his mother on August 5th to let her know that he had safely made it to Chicago. However, weeks then passed with no calls from Jimmy and he did not return home. So, he was reported missing at the beginning of September. The number of unidentified gay victims then dropped to 5 on October 25, 2021, when the man previously only known as Gacy victim number 5 was publicly identified as Francis Wayne Alexander. In addition to his extended family, Wayne is survived by his mother, 2 half-sisters, and 2 half-brothers. DNA extracted from one of victim number 5's MERS had undergone 8 months of specialized testing and processing to prepare a profile suitable to be used with genetic genealogy. The Cook County Sheriff's Office partnered with the DNA Doe Project for the genealogical research. Genealogists identified Wayne as a potential match and submitted his name to the sheriff's office. Investigators there used more traditional means of investigation to follow up on the lead. When they could not find any evidence of Wayne being alive after the time period when they believed victim number 5 was killed, which would have disproven the identification, they traveled to North Carolina to meet with his family. They collected DNA samples from Wayne's mother and brother, which confirmed that Wayne was gay victim number 5. Wayne was born in 1955. He grew up in North Carolina and lived in New York for a time. He got married while he was living there. He and his wife moved to Chicago in February of 1975, but the couple soon divorced after 3 months of marriage. His family never filed a missing persons report because based on certain decisions that he had made, they believed he wanted to be left alone. While they loved him, they thought he no longer wanted anything to do with them when he stopped contacting them. Wayne supported himself by working at various bars and clubs in Chicago. Authorities do not know exactly how he and Gay crossed paths, but Wayne lived and worked in an area where Gay was known to look for victims. He lived near several other victims of Gay, including William Bundy, who lived just blocks away from Wayne. Wayne would have been 21 or 22 years old when he was killed. The last official record of him was a traffic ticket issued to him on January 5, 1976. He was buried at Gacy's property under an individual whose death authorities have placed on March 15, 1977, indicating that Wayne was killed sometime during the window of time between receiving the traffic ticket and the death of the other victim. Financial records show that Wayne earned very little income in 1976, potentially indicating that he was killed earlier on in that window. When investigators returned to the Alexander family to confirm that Wayne was in fact Gacy victim number 5 on October 22, 2021, they were 5 generations of the family in the room to hear the news. Wayne's mother was the first parent to still be alive to be notified that their son had been identified as one of Gay's victims since the renewed effort began in 2011. The family greatly appreciated the kindness the people of Cook County had showed Wayne, giving him a proper funeral and burial, even though they had not known his identity when they did so as of November of 2022. 5 of Casey's victims remain unidentified, but investigators still hope to one day identify all of them. Victim 10 is believed to have been between 17 and 21 years old and between 5 feet 7 inches and 5 feet 11 inches in tall. He had a well-healed fracture to his left clavicle. His time of death has been estimated to have been between March 15th and July 5th of 1977. Victim 13 is estimated to have been between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 2 inches in tall and between 17 and 22 years old. His hair was a dark enough brown that it would appear black. He was probably suffering from a severe toothache at the time of his death, which has been estimated to have been between August and October of 1976. Victim 21's remains were completely skeletonized by the time they were discovered, complicating the process of determining exact details about him. He was most likely between the ages of 15 and 27 and between 5 feet 8 inches and 6 feet tall. Based on the location where his remains were found relative to other victims with known dates of death, it is believed he was killed sometime between June 13th and October 25th of 1976. Victim 26 is estimated to have been between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 6 inches in tall and between 22 and 30 years of age. He was most likely murdered sometime between June 13th and August 6th, 1976. Victim 28 was killed sometime between early 1972 and the end of July of 1975. He was between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 9 inches in tall and 14 and 18 years old. He was found wearing a white metal band on his left ring finger. He had brown hair and may have previously broken his right upper arm. Marty and Glenna Durham, both 46, lived in Sand Lake, Michigan. The couple had been married for 10 years. They each had been previously married and had grown children. Marty was known to be security conscious, weary of strangers, and vigilant about locking the doors to his home. But he was also a good friend and neighbor to the select few people in his social circle. Keith and Connie Ream, who lived across the street from the Durhams, spoke and texted with them every day. They were therefore concerned when they abruptly stopped seeing and hearing from the couple, despite repeated messages to them and 2 trips over to their home. On May 13, 2015, after 2 days of not hearing from them, Connie decided to go back over to Marty and Glenna's home to check on them again. At approximately 4:30 p.m., Connie realized that something was wrong. As soon as she tried to enter the home, the door was unlocked, which Marty would not normally have allowed. The house was usually well kept, but was now in a state of disarray. Various items were thrown about and a lamp had been broken in a bedroom. She discovered Marty and Glenna lying on the floor, both covered in blood. She ran outside to get help from firefighters who had been attending to a fire down the street. First responders initially believed that both Marty and Glenna were dead. However, an hour after authorities arrived on the scene, a trooper from the Michigan State Police was trying to lure the couple's upset dog out of the bedroom. He noticed that Glenna appeared to still be breathing. When he went to check her pulse, her eyes opened and she cried out, "What are you doing?" Despite a serious injury from a gunshot wound to the head, Glenna was still alive and she was taken to the hospital. Marty was not as lucky. By the time he was found, he was dead, having been shot 5 times. 3 shots fired at close range had entered his chest. He had also been shot once in the back and once in the forearm. He was survived by both of his parents, 3 children, and 4 grandchildren. Marty had been an avid outdoorsman, and he had found ways to continue enjoying some of his favorite outdoor activities even after he required the use of a leg brace. The leg brace was used to help treat lingering injuries from a serious car accident Marty had been involved in back in 1995, when his car was struck by a truck speeding through a red light. The accident left him in a coma for weeks and with extensive injuries. The entire left side of his body had been severely injured, and his brain had been jolted against his skull with enough force to cause permanent damage to his frontal lobe. He required months of intensive medical care and rehabilitation. While he was able to eventually lead somewhat of a normal life, he did have ongoing medical problems as a result of the accident. In 2010, Marty's condition worsened, and he required more daily care. As a result of the ongoing effects of his injuries, Glenna began receiving $3,153 a month from the state of Michigan to serve as his caregiver. Marty also received $1,100 a month in disability payments. Marty was notoriously frugal. He did not like to pay to have his home heated, so visitors had to wear thermals under their clothes when they came to see him in the winter. As anxious as he was about spending money, he did find ways to make sure he could still enjoy some of his favorite but more expensive outdoor activities. By cutting his expenses, like his utility payments, he was able to carefully save up money each month for big purchases so that he could still hunt and fish. However, while he was concerned with his finances, it was Glenna who actually handled them. Glenna was not as careful with money as her husband. Glenna had a love of gambling, and while Marty was aware of her hobby, Glenna appears to have kept the extent of her gambling problem a secret from him. Marty would normally accompany Glenna on her trips to casinos, which she would make once or twice a week, but Glenna would also ask family members not to tell her husband about some of her gambling activity or the amounts she spent. In 2010 alone, she spent $75,000 gambling at casinos. In addition to her casino trips, Glenna would also visit gas stations near her home 3 to 4 times a week to purchase lottery tickets, spending between $50 and $100 during each visit. Glenna was in charge of actually paying all the couple's bills and told Marty that they were current on all of them. They were not. In the years leading up to Marty's death, the couple had started going into debt. They owed money on one of their cars and to the IRS. When a collection agency attempted to repossess the vehicle, Glenna assured Marty that she had been making the necessary payments on it. She had not. In April of 2015, Marty's mother, Lillian, saw a legal notice in a local newspaper stating that her son and daughter-in-law's home was being foreclosed on. She called Marty to ask about the foreclosure, but he knew nothing about it. When he bought a copy of the paper and showed the notice to Glenna, she told him that it was a misprint and that she would call the newspaper office. She assured him that it was a mistake and that the mortgage was still being automatically withdrawn from their account every month. The $700 monthly mortgage payment had, in fact, not been paid in a year, and the checking account it was supposed to be withdrawn from only had $182 in it. Their savings account only had $118. On April 28, 2015, foreclosure documents were delivered to the home. The house was set to go up for public auction on May 13th, the day Marty was found dead. After the murder, the documents were found torn up in one of Glenna's drawers. Glenna appears to have kept the true state of the couple's finances and the imminent loss of their home from her husband. Marty seemingly had no idea that his house really was in foreclosure, as he continued to make improvements to the home up until 2 days before his death. When he painted his bathroom ceiling, Marty's 2 sons and daughter went to his home the day after he was found dead. There, they found a manila envelope that had not been processed by the police. Inside were letters Glenna had written to her children and her ex-husband. In the letters, she asked her ex-husband to look after their grown children. She apologized to her children and told them that she loved them. Marty's children were concerned by the implications of these letters. They believed that their stepmother wrote the notes prior to attempting to take her own life. Other evidence surfaced supporting the theory that Glenna had killed her husband and then turned the gun on herself. Between 3:32 and 4:48 a.m. on May 12th, Glenna's cell phone had been used to research Ruger firearms, specifically the Ruger Single-6, the type of weapon used to kill Marty and critically injure Glenna. After these searches, Glenna's phone then sent a text message reading, "Love you, sorry," to Glenna's mother. Blood evidence also showed that Glenna had moved around the house after she had been shot. Most importantly, her blood was found on a couch in the living room. The Ruger Single-6 revolver that was used in the shooting had been found hidden under the love seat in the living room. The neurosurgeon who treated Glenna would later testify that it would have been possible for her to move around the home after being shot with her specific injury, due to her extensive injuries and the months of physical rehabilitation she required. Glenna was not thoroughly interviewed by the authorities until October of 2015, 5 months after Marty's murder. During this interview, Glenna claimed to have no memory of anything that happened between May 11th and when she was taken to the hospital. She was adamant, however, that she had not killed her husband. She claimed that she only went online using her phone to play games and that she did not perform any of the searches about Ruger firearms. She said that the letters to her children sounded like letters she had previously written to them on their birthdays, but also said that she would have only written acrimonious things to her ex-husband, which was in conflict with what she actually wrote in her letter to him found in the envelope at her home. While the financial troubles Glenna and Marty were having, as well as the fact that Glenna had hidden them from Marty seemingly up until just before his death, gave Glenna a motive to kill her husband, physical evidence seemed to support her involvement in his death. Glenna was not arrested. As the months went on with no charges filed in the case, Marty's family became more and more aggravated. They were vocal in the local media about their frustration with the lack of movement in the case. In addition to a dog, Glenna and Marty also had another pet, an African gray parrot named Bud. Marty had owned Bud with his first wife, Christina Keller. Christina had another parrot, and since she had previously owned Bud and knew how to properly care for parrots, Bud went to live with her after Marty's death. But like many African gray parrots, Bud had a talent for mimicking voices he heard as well as an impressive memory. Several people the police spoke to during the course of their investigation asked them if they planned to interview Bud. After Bud went to live with Christina, she became concerned by some of the things she heard him saying, but would regularly repeat the same profanity-laden argument, which appeared to have taken place between two people. He used two different voices to represent the two participants in the conversation, switching between them as he went through each part of the argument. According to Christina, one of these voices sounded like Marty. The apparent argument would end with Bud speaking in his voice for Marty yelling at someone not to shoot. Christina was concerned that Bud had witnessed Marty's murder and was relaying the argument he overheard just prior to Marty being shot. Because of all the concerns about Glenna's involvement in the case, Christina suspected that the person Bud heard Marty arguing with was Glenna. She recorded a video of Bud going through the exchange a month after Marty's murder, but did not immediately share the video. After the first anniversary of Marty's murder came and went with no arrests made in the case, Christina decided to release the video to a local news station. The station aired their story on the case in early June, and the video quickly garnered national attention. 3 weeks after the story featuring the video of Bud aired, Glenna was arrested and charged with Marty's murder. Authorities denied that the video of Bud played any role in Glenna's arrest. Instead, they maintained that they had to wait more than a year to make the arrest because they had been waiting on the results of some tests that required a lot of time and the completion of some interviews that could not be made immediately after Marty's death. Glenna had finally been arrested because the investigation finally had enough evidence to support the murder charge against her, not because of the video. Some of this testing showed that Glenna's DNA was present on the murder weapon, which would prove to be a major piece of evidence at her trial. Christina Keller, however, believed that Bud deserved some credit for helping get justice for her ex-husband, as he helped get attention from Marty's murder and, she believed, put pressure on the prosecutor to make the arrest. With all the media pressure, she told the Cedar Springs Post, while prosecutors were aware of Bud and his apparent recounting of the events leading up to Marty's murder, they believed they had enough evidence and a strong enough case to prosecute Glenna without him. While Bud's apparent play-by-play of the argument that led up to the murder was certainly evocative, there would have been extensive legal challenges to trying to use Bud in court. Prosecutors were able to show that Glenna had a strong motive in no longer being able to hide the imminent loss of their home from Marty, and strong evidence, and the DNA found on the murder weapon, Glenna's phone activity, the notes, and the evidence at the scene supported their assertion that Glenna had killed Marty following an argument before turning the gun on herself in an unsuccessful attempt to take her own life. The jury agreed with the prosecution. On July 19, 2017, after 8 hours of deliberation, they found Glenna Durham guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Glenna maintains her innocence and still has supporters who speak out against her conviction. In April of 2019, Glenna appealed to the Michigan Court of Appeals, arguing that the evidence found on her phone, that showed she had been researching the type of weapon used in the shooting, was hearsay and therefore inadmissible and unfairly prejudicial. The appeal was rejected on December 23 of the same year. The Michigan Supreme Court denied her request to appeal that decision. Glenna is currently serving her sentence at the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility. Catherine Kate Beck was born in Albany, New York on March 1, 1914 to Polish-born parents. She had 1 brother and 5 sisters. The Bicks were a deeply religious Catholic family. Kate's faith would remain a central feature of her life. Despite this, when she got married, it was not in a church. On July 3, 1938, Kate married Jesse Blackburn in a City Hall ceremony. Jesse had been married previously, so they could not be married in the Catholic Church. While Kate could not enter into her marriage in accordance with her religious beliefs, those beliefs kept her in it. Kate and Jesse only lived together as husband and wife for a very short period of time. Jesse was in the United States Army Air Corps, which meant he had to move around a lot, both overseas and to various bases on the West Coast based on where he was stationed. Kate was not interested in leaving her life in Albany and her family behind. Furthermore, based on letters they exchanged, the responsible and regimented Kate quickly grew frustrated with how unreliable and irresponsible her husband was. However, while they lived separate lives, the couple did not divorce, as doing so was against Kate's religious beliefs. They maintained a cordial relationship, periodically exchanging letters, although Kate would also sometimes get letters from the various girlfriends Jesse had over the years. Kate would even wire Jesse money if he needed it, which he often did. Once his service in the air ended, Jesse took a civilian job working for the Army, which eventually led to him moving to Japan. Kate was employed for 30 years at the Mohawk Brush Company, where she eventually became a forewoman. On Saturday, September 12, 1964, 50-year-old Kate worked half a day at the factory and arrived home around noon. Kate owned her two-family house at 117 Colony Street in Albany. She lived on its first floor and rented out the upstairs apartment to supplement her income. Kate was well-liked by her neighbors. She was known for being a kind but fairly private person. She was also known to her neighbors for sticking to a very strict routine. She was seen by neighbors between 5 and 6 p.m. on the 12th, sweeping her front porch as she did every Saturday. This would be the last time anyone saw Kate alive. The last time Kate spoke to anyone would be a short time later when she talked to one of her sisters over the phone. Kate attended the 6 o'clock Mass at St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church every Sunday morning without fail. On September 13th, however, she was not at the service. She did not attend the 8 a.m. Mass either. Later in the day, neighbors noticed that she never came outside to do her normal Sunday chores, hanging her laundry out to dry and burning her trash. Kate was driven to and from work every day by her friend Marie Hogan. When Marie arrived at the Colony Street house on the morning of Monday the 14th, however, Kate did not come outside to get in the car. She did not answer the door either. Concerned, Marie reached out to Kate's 19-year-old niece, Sandy. Sandy had time before she had to start work that day, so she decided to go over to her Aunt Kate's house to check on her since it was so unusual for her to deviate from her normal routine. She asked her sister Marianne to go with her, but Marianne said no because she had to get to school. She had just started the 10th grade. Therefore, Sandy instead asked her Aunt Anna, another one of Kate's sisters, to go over to the house on Colony Street with her. Sandy and Anna knocked on the door, but like Marie, got no answer. Sandy began tossing pebbles at various windows, hoping to get her aunt's attention in whatever room she was in at the time. There was still no answer from Kate. Sandy and Anna then realized they could get inside through the unlocked cellar door. They went through the basement and up the stairs into the foyer shared by Kate's first-floor apartment and the stairs that led to the upstairs rental unit. The door to Kate's part of the house was unlocked and Sandy and Anna were able to get inside. Kate was not anywhere on the first floor of the house. She did not answer when Anna and Sandy called her name. Initially, nothing seemed out of place anywhere on the first floor. Kate had told multiple people she would be painting the upstairs apartment in preparation for a new tenant. So Sandy and Anna went up the stairs to see if they would find her working on the apartment. When they reached the top of the stairs, they saw that the front door of the apartment was open. They also saw Kate lying on the floor of the unit's living room. They ran to call an ambulance to help her, but when it arrived, the paramedics called the police and told Anna and Sandy that there had been a homicide. Kate Blackburn was dead. Kate's body was found in the living room of the upstairs unit, but that was not where she was killed. Blood evidence at the scene indicated that she had initially been attacked in an entryway between the upstairs unit's kitchen and back bedroom. She had been struck on the back of her head multiple times, resulting in skull fractures. Some of her fingers were broken from Kate grabbing the back of her head after the first strike and interrupting the next blow. Investigators believe that Kate may have been attacked with items from her own home. The object used to inflict the head wounds may have been a small hammer or meat tenderizer taken from Kate's kitchen without her noticing. The killer could have taken it while Kate was getting the keys to the upstairs apartment from the lockbox in her bedroom where she kept them. After Kate was incapacitated or unconscious from the blows to her head and lying face down on the kitchen floor, The killer made the first of what would be numerous trips between the house's two apartments. He went downstairs and got one of Kate's kitchen knives. He then returned to the upstairs unit where he turned Kate over onto her back and stabbed her once in the left side of her neck and once on the front of it. The second stab cut her carotid artery and Kate bled to death. The killer then went downstairs and broke into a Cedar Hope chest in order to take a white linen sheet. He also brought up 2 pillows from Kate's bed. It appears that the killer had not anticipated the massive amount of blood that his crime would create. He dragged Kate's body into the living room where it would later be discovered and attempted to clean up the pool of blood left in the spot where he had killed her. He ultimately gave up and left the sheet near the large amount of remaining blood, which would eventually begin seeping through the floor and into the downstairs apartment where Kate had lived. After police concluded their investigation, the task of actually cleaning up the blood would be undertaken by Kate's nieces, Sandy and Teresa. While it was an upsetting task for both of them, they both wanted to spare their mothers the horror of seeing so much of their sister's blood. The killer had pushed up Kate's long brown dress and full-length petticoat so that they bunched around her neck and shoulders and cut away her bra. He then used heated knives to burn intricate lines that formed shapes on Kate's breasts and around her lips. There was no electricity in the upstairs apartment at the time, so it is believed he made multiple trips downstairs to place Kate's own kitchen knives in the burner flames of her own stove to heat them to the point where they could mutilate her body in such a manner. When he was done, the knives were then left under the stove cover. The killer then raped Kate's body, leaving behind sanal fluid. More than 300 people attended Kate's funeral mass at St. Joseph's Church and interment at St. Agnes Cemetery. More than 100 of the mourners were co-workers of Kate's at the Mohawk Brush Company. They had been given the day off to attend the services. 11 of Kate's co-workers served as either honorary or actual pallbearers. Police closely monitored the ceremony, watching the crowd at the burial from across the street and placing a microphone in Kate's casket, hoping to find clues in the case. Kate's distraught family was shocked that someone could hurt her at all, much less in such an abhorrent manner. Several of her loved ones were hysterical at her funeral. At the service, the family also became aware that Kate had been keeping a secret from them for quite a long time. She had been in a long-term relationship for the past 16 years. Kate had met Ben Maskeen in 1948. Ben had previously survived polio. While he was still able to walk following his recovery, he did so with great difficulty. He sold produce for a living and lived with his mother. According to Ben, he and Kate had fallen in love shortly after they met, but their relationship had progressed very slowly as Kate still took her marriage vows seriously despite her long separation from her husband. Being involved with a man who was not her husband in any manner went against her religious beliefs, but so did getting a divorce. Further complicating their relationship was the fact that Kate was Polish and Catholic and Ben was Jewish at that time and in their community. A relationship that crossed these cultural and religious lines was still somewhat unconventional. A few of Kate's close friends knew about her relationship with Ben, but Kate could not bring herself to tell their family about him since her relationship with him went against her religious principles. Kate was very close with her family, and they and their potential opinions were very important to her. While she did not feel as though she could disclose her relationship with Ben to her family, it does appear that she wanted him to get to know her loved ones in whatever limited capacity he could. When Kate's niece and goddaughter, Sandy, was working at a Corel ice cream stand, Kate and Ben would park some distance away from it so that they could watch her work without being seen together. Kate would send Ben up to the counter to order, so that Ben could meet Sandy even though she would not realize his significance and just think he was a regular customer. Ben was interviewed extensively by police and he fully cooperated with the investigation. It appears he cared for Kate dearly and he was heartbroken over her murder. On the Saturday Kate was last seen alive. He had spent the day at a local restaurant playing card games with friends. He had tried coming over to see Kate late that evening, but she had not answered the door. He came back to see her the following day after she should have gone to Mass. But again, she did not answer the door like she normally would. Ben waited for her in the neighborhood throughout the day, but never saw her. He tried calling her approximately 10 times between Saturday and when her body was discovered on Monday with no answer, which greatly concerned him. Ben was able to provide additional information about something police already believed may have been connected to Kate's murder, her renting out the apartment where her body was ultimately found. Kate had the same family as tenants in her apartment for many years. However, They had been forced to move out earlier in 1964 due to a death in the family. Kate began advertising the apartment in the Knickerbocker newspaper in July, and the ad ran for the final time on September 4th, just over a week before Kate was killed. Kate had told various people in her life that she had found a new tenant and that she would be painting the apartment and doing other tasks to prepare for them moving in on October 1st. According to Ben Maskeen, however, Kate was wary of the man who had paid a $10 deposit to move into the apartment. Kate had described the new tenant to family members as a short man in his 50s. He had told Kate that he and his mother would be moving into the apartment. Kate was second-guessing her decision to rent to the man. However, he had smelled of alcohol when he had come to see the apartment. Additionally, he had given Kate his current address. Kate was suspicious because he claimed to live at 369 2nd Avenue, which was in a nicer section of Albany. Kate's home was in a decidedly working-class neighborhood. Kate found the idea of the man and his mother moving from a more desirable neighborhood into hers suspicious. Therefore, on the night of Wednesday, September 9th, she asked Ben to drive her over to see the house at the address the new tenant had given her. The address was legitimate, but it was too dark for Kate and Ben to determine which house was number 369. They then drove back to Kate's house, and Ben left later in the evening. He never saw Kate alive again, and no one ever came forward identifying themselves as the man who had paid Kate the deposit, solidifying concerns initially raised by Kate herself, that something was off with the potential tenant. In addition to the fact that she was killed in the apartment that was for rent, the last known contact with Kate seemed to confirm that renting out the apartment was what brought her killer into her house. Kate spoke to her sister on the phone in the early evening of September 12th. Her sister had wanted to bring Kate over some food for dinner. Kate told her no because a tenant was coming to see the apartment. It is unclear if Kate meant that the man who had paid the deposit was coming over to see the apartment again before he moved in, or if Kate was having someone else who was interested in moving in over to tour the apartment. As uneasy as Kate was about the man who had paid the deposit, she may have tried to find a different tenant before he was due to move in. A scrap of paper with 117, the same number as Kate's house number, was found outside the house, leading to speculation that someone may have come looking for Kate's house. Knowing the house number, but not being familiar with the house itself, Kate's apartment was for the most part left untouched by her killer, with the major exceptions being the hope chest he broke into to find a sheet and the knives he used in the actual murder. However, the one item he specifically looked for and took part of supported the theory that Kate had been killed by the man who had previously paid her the deposit. Kate kept a rent receipt book in a hutch in her living room. She would fill out a slip of paper when she was paid rent or a deposit. The stub would remain in the book so that Kate would have a record of the payments, and she would rip out a receipt to give to the person who had paid her. The killer had gone through the hutch and found the receipt book. The last page of the book that had been written on and the 4 pages behind it, including the stubs that were designed to remain in the book, had been ripped out. Police believed that the killer's name had been written in that book and that he had taken the pages so that he could not be identified. Experts were still able to detect the faint impressions left on the paper by Kate writing on the pages above the ones which remained through indentation analysis. The name on the receipt for the $10 deposit was Robert Broadhead or something similar. Various experts who examined the receipt book were confident in the first name being Robert, but could not be as certain about the last name. Other possible last names provided by various experts included Brand, Boardhead, and Broadstead. The experts were also able to determine that the address listed on the receipt was 3692nd Avenue, the same address Ben Maskeen had provided to them when he described attempting to go to the address with Kate to check out the new tenant's claim of living there a few days before she was killed. Police investigated every man with a name that could match the one written by Kate in her receipt book, but they could not connect any of them to the case. As best as they could tell, the man had provided Kate with a false name. Police also investigated the people living at the address the man had given Kate, as well as people living in houses with the number 369 on other streets in Albany. Investigators did not limit their potential suspects to just men matching the description Kate had provided of the man who had put down a $10 deposit to move in on October 1st. This description came secondhand from Kate's family members, and they may have confused the new tenant with another man who had come to see the apartment. Information about Kate's murder was shared in several states, and investigators traveled as far as Connecticut to follow up on suspicious potential renters. A woman in Connecticut had called police to tell them about a man who had called her, asking to see an apartment she was advertising for rent. She thought the man sounded suspicious, and he had told her he was renting the apartment for himself and his mother, as Kate's new potential tenant had told her. Albany police were waiting for him when he came to tour the apartment. While he had been dishonest with the landlady, he had just been uneasy speaking with her because he was in fact renting the apartment for himself and his girlfriend. Despite the best efforts of police, time went on and no arrests were made in the case. Kate's home was eventually demolished. Kate's murder had a long-lasting, devastating effect on her family. The case also continued to have an effect on the members of the Albany Police Department for decades, which ultimately played a part in Kate's case finally being solved. Today, Melissa my commander with the Albany Police Department, but in 2018, she was a detective in the department's Forensic Investigation Bureau. In August of that year, her husband had attended a party with many of the department's retired detectives. Some of them were discussing old cases that had really stuck with them over the years. For many of them, it was the brutal murder of Kate Blackburn. Then Detective Maury's husband told her about the case when he came home, and she immediately took an interest in the case. She knew because of her position in the Forensic Investigation Bureau that evidence from cases even older than Kate's was still with her department. So, she decided to look into what evidence from Kate's case was still available. She found that quite a large amount of evidence was still with the department and that the investigators in 1964 had collected it carefully, ensuring that it would be well preserved. Detective Mai also learned that she knew someone named in the case file Kate's niece Sandy who had discovered Kate's body. Her husband informed her that this Sandy was their neighbor Sandy, who would compliment their dog while they were out walking it. The detective did not bring up the case with Sandy at the time in an effort to be sensitive to the fact that doing so might upset her. Detective Mai began organizing the case files and making inquiries about submitting some of the pieces of evidence for forensic testing. But her efforts on the case were temporarily interrupted when she was promoted to sergeant and moved to a new division. Then in November of 2018, the Cold Case Analysis Center was founded at the College of St. Rose in Albany. Kate's niece, Sandy, saw coverage about the Sense establishment on the local news and reached out to see if they could help with her aunt's case. They in turn contacted the Albany Police Department, and since Sergeant Mai recently, she was assigned to investigate it. In 2019, Kate's case was featured in the second season of the Cold Case Analysis Sense podcast, Upstate Unsolved, in hopes of identifying new witnesses and generating public interest in the case. Various options for forensically re-examining the evidence in the case were explored over the next few years, and eventually the best option was identified and funding for performing it was secured in 2023. The Albany Police Department began working with Aram, INC.in Texas on advanced DNA testing. After they received a grant from the nonprofit Season of Justice, which made financing the testing possible, a handkerchief which had been found underneath Kate's body was submitted for testing. Authorum was able to use what is essentially a sterile wet vac system to extract DNA from the porous surface of the cloth. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to identify a comprehensive DNA profile. The profile was submitted to the FBI so that genetic genealogy could be used to identify a suspect. This effort did ultimately identify a man who potentially was the individual whose DNA was found at Kate's crime scene. Unfortunately, he had passed away in 1998. Police therefore approached his surviving relatives. They provided DNA samples for comparison and cooperated with the investigation fully, but they do not wish their involvement in the case to be publicly discussed beyond that. Their cooperation showed investigators that they were on the right track, so they moved forward with exhuming the potential suspect's body. The exhumation took place at Albany Rural Cemetery on September 15, 2025, 61 years and 1 day after Kate's body had been discovered. Samples were taken from a femur and an arm bone, and they were submitted for DNA testing. This testing confirmed that the deceased man's DNA was a match to the DNA found at the crime scene. On October 8, 2025, police in Albany announced that after 61 years, they had finally identified the killer of Kate Blackburn as Joseph Nowakowski. Nowakowski was born in Albany in August of 1931. There are no indications that he and Kate knew each other. His criminal activity began before he killed Kate and continued on in the years after the murder. He was in and out of prison for many years. In 1973, He was arrested in Schenectady, New York for viciously attacking an elderly woman in the apartment where she lived alone. He was released from prison in 1980 after serving his sentence for that crime, and he did not have further significant contact with police for the last 18 years of his life. Now that his involvement in Kate's murder has been confirmed, his DNA profile is being uploaded to criminal databases in case he is tied to any other cold cases. Multiple members of Kate's surviving family attended the press conference announcing that the case was finally solved, and that they finally had some answers about the crime that had impacted their family so deeply. Several of Kate's nieces spoke at the event to thank everyone who had worked so tirelessly on the case, and to memorialize their beloved aunt. My name is Marion Samard, and I want to say to you, do you believe in miracles? Prayers are so powerful. I stand before you to say that our family received a miracle, so thank God. After 61 years, we now know who murdered Catherine Blackburn. Our Aunt Kate loved her faith, family, and friends. She was a daughter, sister, aunt, friend, and neighbor. She was a supervisor at the Mohawk Brush Company on Fuller Road in Albany. She was well respected and loved by her coworkers. On behalf of Catherine Blackburn, we would like to thank Commander Melissa Moore, Christina Lane and her interns, and most of all the Albany Police Department for preserving all that they did for 61 years. Without your help, today would not be possible. So many worked diligently to solve this 61-year-old case. Catherine Blackburn, you are not forgotten. One of the speakers was Kate's niece, Sandy Carmichael, now in her early 80s, who had discovered Kate's body when she was just 19 years old. 61 years ago, evil injured my aunt's house and changed our lives forever. We prayed for this day. Thanks to modern technology, persistence, determination, and a dedicated team, it has arrived. Thank you to all who made this possible. May God bless all of you, and my May aunt rest in peace. Around 6 p.m. on December 29, 1979, the pilot of a forestry department spotter plane noticed smoke rising from brushland in Cagullan, a suburb of Perth, Western Australia. They had been in the area monitoring a brush fire. They discovered the horrifying source of the smoke the following morning in the Canning Dam catchment area approximately half a mile south of Brookton Highway. It was coming from a smoldering tree stump, and the badly burned human body slumped over it. The body was that of 22-year-old Karen Tate. Her autopsy revealed extensive head and facial injuries. She had been beaten to death. Police believed a bloody chunk of wood found at the crime scene was the murder weapon. Karen had been born in Victoria in April of 1957, but her family had moved when she was just a year old, so most of her life was spent in Avalon Beach, New South Wales. She had a small circle of close friends, but a large group of social acquaintances. She was very comfortable being on her own and taking care of herself. She was kind, curious, and vivacious. Karen had moved across the country following a devastating loss. Karen was the mother of twin girls, but her daughter Amber died of sudden infant death syndrome in 1977 when she was just 5 months old. Karen left her other daughter with her father in Sydney and moved to Western Australia in 1978. In 1979, she was living on Barley Street in Mountley, but at the end of the year, she was house-sitting at a property in Carrigullen. Karen had spent the evening of December 28, 1979 at a dance held at the North Cottesloe Surf Life Saving Club. She then spent the night with some of her friends in Swanbourne. The following morning, Karen got a ride back to her Barley Street residence around 11 a.m. She was never seen alive again. What happened during the final 7 hours of Karen's life between when she left her friend's home and when the smoke coming from the fire that had been set to her remains was seen was a mystery to police. Trying to ascertain where Karen was and what she was doing during those hours was a major focus of the early investigation into her murder. Karen regularly hitchhiked, often enough that she carried a black helmet with her when she was out just in case she was offered a ride on a motorcycle. This, of course, led police to theorize that Karen had been killed by someone she had accepted a ride from. A young woman did call police with an anonymous tip, saying that she had seen Karen on the back of a man's motorcycle on the day of her death. Police made appeals for the woman to come forward and provide additional information, but she never did. Several burned items had been found in a rough semicircle around Karen's body, which led to fears that her death had somehow been connected to witchcraft. Rumors flew that jewelry Karen had been wearing had secret occult meanings and that she was a practicing witch. Individuals claiming to be white witches told the local newspaper that Karen's murder could be connected to black magic. These claims inspired some local hysteria, but they were all unfounded. Karen was very curious and open-minded, so she visited all manner of bookshops and was willing to listen to other people when they explained their beliefs. But she herself was in no way involved in the occult. Decades passed without answers in Karen's case. In 2023, the government of the state of Western Australia announced a $1 million reward for information in several cold cases, including Karen's, but the offer of the reward led to only a few calls and no solid answers. In 2024, Detective Senior Sergeant Steve Potter announced that male DNA had been found on items found at Karen's crime scene. The Western Australia Police Force's Special Crime Squad team was in the process of analyzing the DNA in hopes of identifying who it came from. The main technique they would be using was genetic genealogy. The effort was massive and time-consuming, for people worked on the case almost non-stop for a full year. They examined genetic profiles from the commercial DNA sites GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA and developed a family tree containing more than 10,000 people that went back to the 1600s. Most of the relatives of the killer initially identified by this effort were several generations removed from the killer. So tediously researching the links between all of the individuals in the family tree and expanding it took a lot of time and effort. In March of 2025, however, all of the work paid off. On March 13, 2025, Gold Case investigators with the Western Australia Police Force announced that they had been able to tie the DNA profile from Karen's crime scene to a potential suspect. As such, they were formally identifying Terrence John Pfizer as a suspect in Karen's murder. Unfortunately, that was all they could do, as Pfizer had died of cancer 25 years earlier and therefore could not be arrested and charged. Pfizer was born on February 11, 1950 in Mount Lai. From 1970 until 1972, he served in the Australian Army. He spent the majority of his service stationed in Townsville. Fisher got married in 1973, but he and his wife divorced in 1981. The marriage did not produce any children. Around the time of Karen's murder, Fisher was living mainly in Rivervale and Manning. He then lived with his father in Manning until his death from cancer on August 27, 2000. He had no criminal record and had only ever interacted with police for minor traffic infringements. When police announced that Pfizer had been identified as a suspect in Karen's case, they also made another surprising announcement. They believed that Pfizer was connected to two other cold cases not previously tied to Karen's case, the murders of Carrie Turner and Barbara Western. If Pfizer did in fact kill all three of these women, he would be considered a serial killer. Carrie Suzanne Turner was born in September of 1972, the youngest of three children. In 1991, the 18-year-old was living with her parents in the suburb of Bickley and working part-time as a shop assistant. On June 29th, she and a friend hitchhiked from the friend's home in Armadale to Pinocchio's nightclub on Murray Street in Perth. Arriving there around 10:30 p.m., she became separated from her friend once they got inside. Carrie was seen socializing with many different people throughout the night until she left the club alone around 4 a.m. on June 30th. Carrie got into a taxi outside the club, but the driver soon realized that she did not have the money to pay her fare, so he made her get out on the causeway in East Perth. Multiple witnesses saw her sitting on the curb or trying to hitch a ride. Another taxi driver picked her up, but he also realized that Carrie did not have the money to pay him. So, he had her get out of his vehicle on Shepperton Road near Marr Street at approximately 5 in the morning. A vehicle traveling southeast on Shepperton Road was seen pulling up alongside Carrie. Witnesses reported that Carrie got into the car and it continued on. She was never seen alive again. Carr's parents reported her missing on July 1st, and she remained missing for almost a month. Her body was discovered in bushland in the area of Bedford near the Canning Dam, fully clothed and hidden behind a log. Barbara Ann Western was born in Perth on May 30th, 1948. She got married in 1967 and had 2 children, but the marriage ended after 5 years. Barbara then raised her children on her own. She had a very loving personality, which made her an attentive and caring mother, as well as a supportive friend to her wide social circle. Barbara began a new relationship 10 years after her divorce and began living with her partner a year into the relationship, but the couple did not marry. Barbara went out for the evening on June 27, 1986, leaving her home sometime between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. She saw two friends at the Balmoral Hotel in East Victoria Park and ran into an acquaintance. Later in the evening at the nearby Irene's Park Tavern, Barbara was wearing a distinctive orange parka that night, which helped when police were later looking for witnesses. Barbara was seen leaving the tavern around 11:30 p.m. She never returned home. Barbara remained missing for almost 5 years. On March 14, 1991, two people were out collecting wood near Canning Dam and Carrigoulan when they came across what they believed to be human bones in a clearing roughly 50 feet off of the trail. Several items, including items of clothing and pieces of jewelry that belonged to Barbara Western, were found under a nearby tree trunk. Police were able to confirm that the bones were those of Barbara Western. It is unclear why exactly police believe all three women were killed by the same person. The main detail connecting all three cases is the locations where the bodies were found. The sites where the bodies of Karen Tate and Barbara Western were found had less than 100 feet between them. Carrie Turner's body was found approximately 4.5 miles away from those sites. Investigators believe there was a specific reason why Carrie was taken there, although they have not yet made that reason public. Authorities in Australia normally do not release very much information about suspects before they are convicted of a crime in court. This case is unusual in that they have released quite a lot of information about Pfizer to the public. They are hoping that by disclosing the places where he lived, worked, and socialized, they will hear from as many potential witnesses as possible. Investigators are very interested in gathering information about Fisher's movements and his routines, as they believe this information will provide them with more definitive answers. In the three cases they now suspect him in, Pfizer worked in construction for the Public Work Department constructing government buildings in and around Perth. He took a voluntary redundancy in 1993 and started his own business. Pfizer was also a prominent member of the Fremantle Sailing Club, where he both socialized and participated in offshore racing. He spent the early 1980s building a yacht at a warehouse in Carroll and launched it in 1985. Pfizer was also known to frequent pubs in Carroll, Victoria Park, and Manning. Anyone who knew him from any of these places and could provide information about him is asked to contact Crime Stoppers. Police say that even the smallest of details could be critical to their investigation. In addition to making a public appeal for potential witnesses, investigators also executed a search warrant at the home where Fisher lived until his death on March 13, 2025. They began what would ultimately be a 5-day search of the property, which included digging up the backyard. According to a police spokesperson, several items from the property were taken into evidence, with some of them being sent for forensic examination. Karen's sister Annery and brother Matt gave an interview following Fisher's identification. They expressed gratitude to all of the investigators who worked on their sister's case, as well as relief that Fisher is dead, both because it spares them the trauma of going through a trial and because he can no longer hurt anyone else. They miss their sister and find some peace of mind in the answers they now have. That being said, they also implored anyone who knew Pfizer to come forward, as they could unknowingly be able to open up a new avenue of investigation that ultimately answers some of the remaining questions about what happened to Karen, Carrie, and Barbara. In 1954, Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, was still a small town, a place where residents of Philadelphia could make a day trip and feel like they had been transported to the countryside. Central to the town's economy was the Phoenixville Iron Works, which brought a large number of Eastern European immigrants looking for work to town. These immigrant families and their descendants largely shaped the culture of the quiet town. The Kyoto family was one such family. Their surname had been anglicized from the much more obviously Slavic name of Kodik. Wassel and Theodosia Kyoto were parents to a son and 6 daughters. Their youngest child was Marguerite, who was very kind and had a gentle and sweet disposition. She was adored by all of her siblings. Even after she grew up, they still looked at her as the baby of the family to a certain extent. That is not to say that Marguerite was spoiled. Despite all of the quality time she spent with her family, she was close with all of her siblings, even her oldest ones, after they left home while she was still very young, and they all enjoyed spending time with her. Because she was the youngest of the Kyoto siblings, Marguerite was fairly close in age to the oldest of her nieces and nephews. Her oldest nephew, Bill Gore, was just 9 years younger than Marguerite. He and his parents lived in Philadelphia, but regularly took the train out to Phoenixville to enjoy the more pastoral setting and time with family. Some of Bill's favorite memories of his childhood involve his Aunt Marguerite. The two of them would go out on the roof of the family home through a bathroom window to sunbathe. They worked in the garden together as well, picking and processing fruit and vegetables to enjoy together. March 2nd, 1954 was a Tuesday, which made it an unusual night for socializing. However, that year it was the night before Ash Wednesday, the day when the somber and reflective season of Lent would begin in preparation for Easter. As such, the day before Ash Wednesday is a common day of merit and indulgence for various Christian communities all over the world. Phoenixville in general and the Byzantine Catholic community Marguerite belonged to specifically were no exceptions. 22-year-old Marguerite had to report to her job as a secretary at the BFG Goodrich tire plant in the nearby town of Oaks the following morning. But like many young people, she still participated in the pre-Lenten festivities that night. Marguerite attended 2 different dances that evening with a group of her friends. The first dance was at the Valley Forge Army Hospital. Marguerite and her friends left that dance at approximately 9:40 p.m., and then went to the dance at the Polish American Citizens Club on the north side of Phoenixville. Around midnight, as March 3rd and Ash Wednesday officially began, the group left so that they could all go home for the evening. Marguerite started walking home with Julia Potazniak, a friend from work. They walked together for approximately half an hour. But once they reached the intersection of Gay and Morgan Streets, they needed to go in different directions to get home. Before they parted ways, Marguerite said something strange to Julia. "If you don't see me in the morning, look for me in Burns Alley." Burns Alley ran behind the Kyoto family home. No one has ever been able to make sense of this statement. It is believed that Marguerite made this statement in jest, but it is unclear exactly what the point of the joke was. It would later be speculated that Marguerite had plans to meet someone in the alley before she went inside her house. The passing joke would prove to be ominously prophetic, as Marguerite never made it home that night. When Marguerite was not home in the morning, her family reported her missing and began searching for her. Bill Gore, who was 13 years old at the time, remembers his mother leaving their Philadelphia home to get to Phoenixville to look for her younger sister as soon as she heard the news. The Phoenixville Police Department began organizing their own searches of the area. Police had good reason to be concerned about Marguerite's well-being very early into the investigation into her disappearance. A resident of 361 Washington Avenue had reported that around 12:45 a.m. on March 3rd, they had heard a shrill scream followed by a scuffle in an alleyway. They then saw a man come out of the alley carrying a woman under his arm as he walked towards Lincoln Avenue. He turned onto that street and walked north. A second witness reported seeing the same thing from across the street. In addition, they also saw a dark sedan come back up Lincoln Avenue. It turned right on Washington Avenue and stopped across from the alleyway the man had originally come out of with the woman. The man got out of the car, went into the alley, and picked something up. He then got back into the car and drove west on Washington Avenue. The witness could not tell if there were other people in the car. The 2 witness statements did not specify that the woman they saw was unconscious, but they did both note that she was not screaming or fighting to get away from the man. The timing of this incident did mean it was possible that the woman who was abducted was Marguerite Kyoto. Marguerite and Julia had gone their separate ways to get home at 12:40. Marguerite would have been at that section of Washington Avenue as she continued on her way home approximately 5 minutes later. Police did not have definitive proof that the woman the witnesses had seen was Marguerite, but the reports did increase their concern for her safety. A massive search effort was carried out over the next 3 days. Policemen, soldiers, firefighters, and volunteers from the community combed through wooded areas and fields within a 16 miles radius of Phoenixville. Those who could not search joined Marguerite's family at church, praying for Margaret's safe return. 2 companies from the National Guard joined the search on Saturday, March 6th. Unfortunately, the search for Marguerite was about to reach a tragic resolution. That morning, Three Phoenixville firefighters were searching the abandoned grounds of what had been the Pickering School in Schuylkill Township, 2 miles south of Phoenixville. At approximately 10:45 a.m., one of the firefighters, Frederick Baird, discovered a shoe near an outhouse, which was approximately 150 feet away from Valley Forge Road. When Frederick looked more closely at the outhouse, he noticed that 2 of its boards appeared to have blood stains on them. He opened the door to the outhouse and saw part of a woman's coat protruding from the cesspool. When he looked directly into the cesspool, he saw the body of Marguerite Kyoda encased in icy water with her legs pointed up towards him. Marguerite had been stabbed 3 times in the left side of her chest, which resulted in a massive hemothorax. Material from the water in the cesspool was found in Margaret's airway, indicating that she had still been alive and breathing when she was put into the water. She was still wearing the clothes she had been wearing the night she disappeared. Her brown purse was found on top of her, and the watch on her left wrist had stopped at 1:25 on the morning of March 3rd. Marguerite also had superficial abrasions to both the left side of her neck and to the right side of her face. She had not been sexually assaulted. Margaret's murder was a defining moment for Phoenixville. Many residents could still recall what they were doing when they learned Marguerite was missing and when her body was found even decades later. It was unthinkable that such a brutal crime could have been committed in the quiet and fairly small town. The case inspired a major change in the mood of the town and sensational headlines in nearby Philadelphia. The unease created by Margaret's murder would linger in Phoenixville for years, as the identity of her killer remained a mystery. The lack of resolution in Margaret's case was not a result of inaction on the part of local police. The case was actively investigated for over a decade. Police interviewed every man Marguerite danced with on the night of March 2nd and every man they could find who had danced with her at earlier USO dances at the Army Hospital. Because of the Iron Works and the Army Hospital, many people who had come to Phoenixville for work and treatment left town in the years following the murder, and investigators traveled all over the country to interview them. Numerous suspects were developed, but just as many were eliminated. That is not to say that the investigation was flawless. Evidence was destroyed as soon as the murder investigation began. The outhouse Marguerite was found in was taken down so that her body could be removed from the cesspool. It was then taken apart and disposed of before the police crime lab team that had been sent from Philadelphia to the crime scene could make it there. As such, all potential evidence from it was lost. Perhaps most importantly, the loss of the outhouse itself means that the stains Frederick Baird believed to be blood on 2 of its boards could never be analyzed. If it had been blood, it almost certainly did not belong to Marguerite. While she was stabbed 3 times, the bleeding caused by these wounds was almost exclusively internal. There had been no blood on Margaret's clothing, and there were no indications at the crime scene that she had been stabbed. That fact was not discovered until her autopsy was performed. If the stains were blood, they potentially could have been from Margaret's killer. If that were the case and the boards or samples from them were properly preserved, DNA testing may have been able to solve the case in the future. Numerous documents and pieces of evidence have also reportedly gone missing from the case file. Allegedly, a list of 25 potential suspects was missing from the Phoenixville Police Department's files. When the state police reviewed the case, a rumor spread that the list had been disposed of because one of the potential suspects was a prominent member of the community who did not want to be associated with the murder. There is also the matter of why the Phoenixville Police Department was assigned as the primary investigative agency on the case in the first place. Technically, the state police had jurisdiction in the case because Marguerite went missing in one township and her body was found in another. While the state police played a role in the investigation at various points, the Phoenixville Police Department, which had a much more limited staff, remained the primary agency for an unknown reason. Fred K. McInnes, the Phoenixville police chief at the time of the murder, was asked why the case had been assigned to his department during an interview with the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1990 when he was 82 and living in a retirement home. He could not remember the circumstances of the case being assigned to the Phoenixville police over the state police. Another aspect of the case, which could have been an oversight, but has given rise to a number of concerns, is the lack of a public coroner's inquest into Margaret's murder. Following the murder, Chief McInnes and Deputy Coroner Cooper T. Bishop stated that a public hearing would be held to examine the evidence and determine the known circumstances around Margaret's death. Bishop filed a coroner's bill on March 31, 1954 that listed the inquest as pending. However, 2 weeks later, Bishop filed another document which stated that a public inquest was not necessary in the case because there was no lawful violence or suspicious circumstances attending the death of said Dent. This is obviously incorrect. But by the time this document was publicly reported on in 1990, Bishop was dead. So there was no way to ask him about what circumstances or mistakes led to him filing such a document. While we will never know why this document was filed, we do know that a public inquest was never held because of it. Such a hearing almost certainly would not have led to the case being solved in 1954, but it presumably would have resulted in an official record of all of the evidence available at the time, which could have helped future investigators. It should be noted that none of this information is being presented to imply wrongdoing on the part of the police. The case is full of missing pieces and unanswered questions, but this is unfortunately common in cases that have gone unsolved for decades. Since we have so many unanswered questions about the case and the investigation, it is of course possible that someone in the department covered things up for someone, but it is also of course possible that no such interference occurred. It is still worth looking at all of these frustrating aspects of the investigation because they are at least part of the reason why Marguerite's murder has remained unsolved. Phoenixville Police Chief Joseph Kane began actively investigating the case again at the beginning of 1975. He soon said that he had a strong suspect and that an arrest in Margaret's case could be imminent, but the investigation soon stalled again. The following year, he stated that his department had two main suspects. One of them was a man who had since committed suicide in Puerto Rico, and the other had gone missing in Florida. Chief Kane was more interested in the latter suspect, as he believed this suspect had access to the type of instrument used to stab Marguerite. He had consulted with outside experts who had examined the autopsy findings. They had come to the conclusion that the weapon used to stab Marguerite was a double-sided surgeon's awl. Unfortunately, the Phoenixville Police Department did not have the resources to travel to follow up on these suspects in Florida or Puerto Rico. According to Phoenixville locals, rumors ran rampant around town about who could have killed Marguerite in the years after her murder. 3 men in particular found themselves targets of speculation. 2 of these men were vaguely identified by law enforcement in interviews as a doctor and a police officer. However, according to Dan Barrow and Joe Winnick, these 2 men can confidently be eliminated from suspicion based on the facts of the case, as found in the available police files. Mr. Barrow and Mr. Winnick were just children at the time of Margaret's murder, but like many members of the Phoenixville community, the case stuck with them. They later worked together to research the case, and by 1990, they had plans to potentially publish everything they had uncovered in a book, although it appears they ultimately never did so. One of the suspected men, the doctor, may have been the same man who had ultimately disappeared in Florida and been identified by Chief Kane as a potential suspect in 1975. Because of his occupation, he presumably could have had access to a surgeon's awl as Chief Kane said his suspect had. However, this man came under suspicion in town because of rumors that there had been bloodstains seen in the backseat of his car around the time of the murder. However, as noted earlier, all of the bleeding caused by Margaret's stab wounds had been internal. Blood did not even get onto her clothing, so it presumably would not have left large stains in whatever car she was transported in. The other longtime victim of the rumor mill, the policeman, saw Marguerite and her friend Julia just before the 2 young women's paths diverged as they walked to their homes. He had been out walking his dog. However, this man would have had less than 5 minutes to walk to his home, get his dog inside, get his car out of his garage, drive it several blocks to park it, and then walk to the alley where Marguerite was initially attacked. According to Mr. Barrow's calculations, this would not have been physically possible. The policeman did speak about Margaret's death shortly before his own death sometime in the late 1980s. He said that he had not killed her. Like many Phoenixville residents, he was simply still haunted by Margaret's tragic death even after more than 30 years. Margaret's family was devastated by her death. Her sister, Bill Gore's mother, had a nervous breakdown after the murder. She spent the rest of her life still speaking of the little sister she lost and wishing she had some answers about her murder. Shortly before she died in 1998, she told Bill, "Nobody has done anything, and I'm ready to die. I don't know what happened. I want somebody to tell me something. Margaret's parents and all 6 of her older siblings died without any of the answers they so desperately needed about her murder. After 71 years, Margaret's killer is almost certainly no longer alive and therefore cannot be brought to justice. That does not diminish Margaret's remaining family's desire to still see her killer identified. The pain Bill Gore feels over the death of his aunt has not lessened now that he has fewer people to share it with. He and the rest of Margaret's surviving nieces and nephews still hope that they will find the answers that eluded their parents and grandparents. While the killer may not be alive for questioning, Marguerite's family believes that if they know who killed her, they may be able to ascertain why she was killed. While they will most likely never see a conviction, they still have hope for some measure of closure. Margaret's case is still officially open. If you have any information, please contact the Phoenixville Police Department at the number on the screen.